Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to talk about the philosophy of emergence and how that relates to creativity. So, without further ado, I'm going to dive right in. Now, a little bit before the 1950s, there was a philosophical school called the Vienna Circle, also known as the logical positivists. And the logical positivists had a dream, and their dream was essentially to reduce and explain. So, reduce everything to the laws of physics and explain everything via the laws of physics. So they believed that everything could be reduced to physics. This seemed to be realizable by the time the 1950s came around, roughly, and Francis Crick and Watson discovered the DNA molecule. And it started to seem as though everything could indeed be explained in a material way. So essentially, what they believed was that psychology could be reduced to biology, biology could be reduced to chemistry, and chemistry could be reduced to physics. However, after the 1950s, science started to get more and more complex, and this dream of logical positivists was pretty much blown apart. And so rather, what could be called the re-emergence of emergence. Emergence was actually around during the early 1900s, but it re-emerged in probably the late 1970s, maybe even later. And the idea was indeed that physics led to chemistry, but that chemistry was separate from physics. And chemistry led to biology, but biology was separate from chemistry. And biology led to psychology, but psychology was separate from biology. And in terms of biology relating to psychology, this would make sense when it comes to very problematic issues in the philosophy of mind. So if you're studying biology, particularly neurobiology, you would be talking about the brain, and yet we're still not sure if the mind is its own separate entity or how it could be its own separate entity, because things like desires and the like arise from the brain, and so that would be the study of psychology, and it seems that psychology is its own discipline, and that psychology and biology are separate, meaning in a sense the mind and the brain are separate, or at least that the relationship is a lot more complicated. So the main point is the idea that in terms of emergence, the idea is that there are different layers of existence. Now, another idea that comes out of emergence is the idea that unrelated properties emerge in higher layer systems. So there's a great example where you could look at ants individually, and they seem to be doing nothing that relates to the colony, and essentially they are. They're not doing anything that's related. And yet, when you look at the ant colony as a whole, you see a complex system, you see a complex pattern, and you see how everything is interconnected. So we think the ant isn't related, and yet to the colony, and yet somehow its action affects the entire colony. And so essentially, the ant's action emerges through the complex pattern of the colony. So just keep that in mind for now. So there's another idea which suggests that systems are becoming more and more complex. And so what this means is that when we look at a system of biology, we realize that there's more and more levels of biology, and there's more and more that we have to study. And essentially, these systems are growing. So not only are we already learning more about the systems, but the systems themselves are becoming more and more complex. And this would relate to emergence. So if you take both of these ideas, the idea that unrelated properties emerge in higher layer systems, and you take the idea that systems are becoming more and more complex, what you're left with is the idea that we actually live in a very creative universe. And this is an interesting idea, to think that we live in a creative universe. You wouldn't necessarily have to believe that it's God that's creating, but you could definitely see a universe that is evolving. You could see systems as becoming much more and more complex, which would essentially be creative. And this is going to help me get to the heart of what I want to talk about. So all of these ideas of emergence are background information for my main claim in terms of creativity and in terms of how I want to discuss creativity. And my claim is that, so if we believe that the universe is not static, as well as the other things I've mentioned, then we believe that we can come to the conclusion that our actions can emerge. So think about, of course, what I'm saying in terms of emergence. So our actions are a single entity, and we have no idea how it's related to the whole. And yet this action can emerge in the whole system, which we could call humanity, for instance, just to keep things simple. And so, in other words, our actions can create. Now, this is powerful because emergence shows us that everything is connected in very complex ways. And this is, to be specific, this is interesting because it suggests that our actions can relate to the whole, can relate to humanity in very complex ways. So I'm going to leave you with two examples to kind of illustrate this point. One of them is the way that we're generally conditioned to see ourselves in the world, and how we're not conditioned to see any opportunity as an opportunity of creation. So for instance, basically if you're in like the store, for instance, you are the consumer or the shopper, and the checker is the checker, and you have roles to fulfill. There's no creation, there's just a linear system, just a linear motion. However, what I'm positing is, I'm saying that through this relationship of the checker and you, the shopper, there can be some layer of creation, and your action can become a creative process, and the interaction can become a creative process, and through that, properties can emerge in very complex ways. So if you think about how the checker is related to other people, you could say that there's this very complex interconnection between, kind of like a spider web, of you, the checker, you and your relationship to other people, the checker's relationship to other people. And essentially what I'm saying is that if you are able to see your actions as creativity and creation, and you see your actions and you see yourself acting as a form of creating, then you're not just sticking to the normal roles. You're sticking to the idea of you creating in this dynamic, and through that, complex patterns can emerge. And we never know, the reason why I'm positing this is because we never know how our actions can impact the world. We never know how our creative action, whatever that would be, I'll let you decide, but our creative actions towards the checker, we never know how that's going to affect this complex system of humanity. And so there's another example that I wanted to mention to kind of illustrate this point of emergence, which is the idea that works of literature are reflections of the time, and they emerge. So it wouldn't be a stretch to say that, for instance, the Iliad is a reflection of ancient Greece, and it emerged out of the complex culture and time. You always want to say that a work of literature is representative of the time, but in some ways you can, because definitely the writer was thinking about a lot of what was preoccupying that time. And so definitely you could definitely say that works of literature emerge from the time. And so why is this important? Essentially what I want to challenge you to do is to not see your decisions as simply something that you do, to not see yourself as simply in a role, but to see yourself as actively engaged. And so this is going to go into a little bit of existentialism, but there's a claim by Heidegger who says that the problem with epistemology, or the study of knowledge, is the idea that we only become a spectator, and we're not actively engaged with the real world. So we only look around us and see, well, how do we know things without actively engaging? And so Heidegger would go against that and say that what we need to do is actively engage. And to tie this up, I would basically say that looking at our actions as being able to emerge in this complex system of humanity, even if we have no idea how we are related to the complex system, how our actions are related, if we believe that that our actions can emerge in this complex system of humanity, and we believe that our actions are a form of creation, then it definitely frees us in a lot of ways, and it definitely allows us to create. And we're not stuck in just a linear path. We are in a much more multi-layered path, to use the metaphor of emergence, and I believe that would enrich our lives significantly. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.